Thank you, Richard, for organizing this event, and thanks to all of you for coming. I'm glad we've got a full house. It gives you a little sense of what it's like to be packed into a chicken bus and ride through Guatemala, so that's a good little simulation for you. When you grow up, as I did, with two sets of parents, you get used to looking at things from multiple perspectives. I think that's particularly true when one of those sets of parents is in maximum security prison, and the other raises you in a middle-class home and sends you to an elite private school. Living in those two worlds, straddling them my whole life, living between them, traveling between them, profoundly shaped the person that I am today, the way that I grew up, and perhaps most relevant of all to this project, it shaped the way that I approached Latin America from day one. It's also perhaps my family background that led to my love of travel, to my commitment to travel, to see the world firsthand. Life on the road, I learned very early on, means constant stimulation, intellectual engagement, and exposure to new and different perspectives. To travel, I believe that one must be optimistic. Optimistic about the potential, about the possibilities, about the adventures that lie in wait beyond the horizon. I think Mark Twain put it very well when he said, "Travel is fatal to ignorance, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness." I think the optimist hits the road and the pessimist stays at home. The pessimist doesn't believe there's anything worthwhile beyond the horizon, is unwilling or unable to put themselves out there, to take the risk, to see what's new, what's different, and it's easier to experience life from the sofa, from through a television screen. I certainly had no idea what to expect when I hit the road as an 18-year-old, fresh out of high school, back in 1999, and headed off on my first trip overseas on my own. It was a trip to Guatemala, which I write about in the first chapter of this book. Thank you. I didn't set out to write a book. I know a lot of travel books are written by people who plan a journey. They want to follow Marco Polo's route on the Silk Road, or they want to follow Che Guevara's motorcycle diary journey, and then they write a book about it. In my case, it was the other way around. I set out to travel with an interest in learning Spanish and understanding the world. And it was only much later that I realized perhaps there was a story to tell and that I should try to write about it as a way to make sense of the travel I had already done. The experiences I had on the road, particularly the political shifts that I witnessed in Latin America and my own coming of age, my own growth and development, are what led me to write this book, Gringo. As one small indication of the changes that have swept the region, in the last 10 years, since I started traveling in Latin America, there are now more than 10 separate countries that have elected, through democratic process, left-wing governments, independent governments, which would have been unimaginable in the 1980s or 1990s in those same countries. But there's so much variation between these leaders that it's very difficult to generalize. It's very difficult to use labels for all of them. There's a really wide variation. And one of the things I try to do in the book is give meaning and give life to that variation, not just of the political leaders, but also of the social movements, of the people that brought those leaders to power. I want to just give you a brief outline of the book and the way that I structured it. I start off, the book is chronological. I start off in 1999 with my first trip to Latin America. It's a trip to Guatemala, as I mentioned. From there I travel to Chile, Argentina, Brazil. I have a couple chapters on Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia, and I end with Venezuela again. As I said, the book is largely chronological, and in it I try to describe not just the politics and the policies, but also the people, the friendships, the relationships that I built, the challenges, the love. I tried to basically give voice to the passion, the hope, and the color, the energy of the region that I came to love while I was on the road in Latin America. I believe that all of us as individuals, as a community, and as a country have to choose how we want to interact with the world. Do we want to do it behind barbed wire, behind fences and walls, through television cameras and television screens ultimately? Or would we rather interact directly, engage directly, have relationships based on equality, mutual understanding, and respect? Obviously, I lean towards the latter, and I encourage people to get out there and travel and see the world for themselves whenever and however possible. I really hope that those of you who have had experiences traveling will share some of them with me and with each other and continue to travel. I think our policies as a country have far too often been motivated and determined by the former kind of experience, by this mentality of isolation, by this mentality of the other, the foreign. And I think it leads to misguided and often arrogant policies. There's this sense that we're above Latin America, not just geographically, but in many other ways as well. I think right now the United States government has three major policy opportunities with regard to our relationship in Latin America, and there are also policy issues that have very significant implications for the United States. The first one is the war on drugs. I think it's high time we recognize the war on drugs as a costly failure. The second one is that our immigration policy needs to be revamped entirely. Immigrants have always been and will always be a core part of American identity, a central part of the economy in this country, and we should recognize that and make policies that reflect that. And finally, I think there's huge amounts of opportunity in our relationships with countries like Cuba and Venezuela that have been unnecessarily estranged and isolated, and which should be brought back into normal diplomatic relations, should be brought back into hemispheric political affairs. This book has a subtitle, Coming of Age in Latin America. And we picked that subtitle for two reasons. One is my own personal journey, my own coming of age, which was experienced largely in Latin America or reflecting on Latin America, even as a student here at Yale, writing my senior thesis on topics related to Latin America, as a student in Oxford, again, writing my master's thesis on Latin American-related topics, and the parallel thread, the parallel narrative arc throughout the book, which is Latin America's political shift. So throughout, I combine the personal with the political, the internal with the external, the self-reflection with the interpretation of the world that I'm traveling through. I believe Latin America is in the midst of a fascinating political transformation in which people across the region, social movements across the region, are reinventing the very concept of democracy. Millions of people who've never had a stake in the system before, who've never had any feeling of identity or representation through their government, are coming to believe that the system can work for them peacefully and democratically. Everywhere from the urban barrios of Venezuela to the mining villages in the Andes of Bolivia to the fishing villages in the Ecuadorian Amazon, people are experimenting with democracy. They're finding their own stake in the system. They're learning to participate and to engage actively in the day-to-day governance of their country and of their communities. In the U.S. news and media, often these developments are reported simply as Chavez said this crazy thing or Morales did that crazy thing. I think that, while what Chavez and Morales do is interesting and important for all of us to be aware of, it's much more important to understand, the Jose Sanchez's or the Joe Schmoes of the world, the people who are actually driving these changes, the people who are behind the social movements, the people who the changes hopefully will benefit in the long run. That's one of the reasons why I chose to write this book. I hope that it gives voice to the people that I met along the way. I hope that it gives meaning to the political transformations that they have so courageously embarked on. So with that, I'd like to just read two short excerpts from the book. One of them is from a trip I took. It's really just the introduction to a chapter that I took when I was on my junior year abroad in Chile, and I had my summer vacation free, and I was backpacking through South America, and I found myself at the mouth of the Amazon River, and I got on a cargo boat, and I was heading up the river. The oversized cloth hammock would be my bed for nearly a week on the Estrella de Amazona, a 200-foot riverboat that plied the wide, dark waters of the Amazon River from the mouth at Belén to the capital of Amazon State, Manaus. I strung my new bed on the open-air lower deck, helped by a member of the crew whose biceps were as large as my thighs and whose missing front tooth made him look ominous, to me at least. As I waited for the boat to take on cargo and leave Belém, I couldn't spot a single other tourist on board. Ports and border towns tend toward the dangerous, and being the only foreigner on a cargo boat about to head up the Amazon in the dead of night, I couldn't help but feel a little anxious. Sitting in my newly strung bed, I felt sweat beating on my brow. Other passengers were setting up their hammocks on all sides, awfully close, it seemed. I saw would-be thieves and assailants everywhere.